Hi everyone, so Massive is one of the most widely used synths in the world today due to its wide selection of both bass and lead sounds. And besides the presets, it's used by a wide range of artists because it really allows you to customize and it provides lots of flexibility in terms of creating new instruments as well. And Massive can be used both as a standalone application and both as a plugin. So in this video, we will use it as a plugin. So let's get into the essentials of Massive. Massive is a polyphonic synth, which means that it can play multiple voices at once. It also is based on wavetables, which we will get to in a second. So let's get to know the main menu of Massive first. On the left side of this box, we have the file menu, which allows us to create a new sound or load an older one. Below that, where it says voices, shows that Massive can play up to 16 voices at the same time. Up and to the right is the name of the patch that's being used. If you click on this, you can get a list of available patches and you can pick one. Below that are the menu options for what MIDI channel the synth will respond to. In this case, we will just leave it at MIDI all. Right next to that is the CPU use, which shows the percentage of CPU is used from your computer. And next to that is the quality setting. Your choices here are between ultra, high, or echo. Ultra is the maximum setting, but it will use the maximum amount of processing power. And in my experience, I've seen that people like to write in echo mode, which uses less CPU. And when they're bouncing the track, especially if they're doing a live bounce, they will use the ultra. To the right of the quality setting will be an exclamation mark, which is the panic button. And this is if for some reason Massive gets stuck playing a chord or playing another sound, you can just press this button to release the note. And next to that are two arrows, which will allow you to browse through the patches. So to the right is the view menu with three buttons under it. We have Synth, Attributes, and Browser. Currently we're under Synth. To the right of that is the Attributes page. You can add metadata here like author name, company, bank name, as well as comments, which will be useful in the next section. And that's going to be the Browser page, where you can search for sounds based on the categories provided, or you can also use the search bar to enter certain keywords. So let's get into the sounds of Massive. So Massive is comprised of three types of oscillators. We have wavetable oscillators, a modulation oscillator, and a noise oscillator. We'll get into all of these in a second. The first one I want to talk about is the wavetable oscillator. And Massive has three identical ones of this. We have OSC 1, 2, and 3. So how does it work? In the top left corner, there's a button to turn the oscillator on and off. We first turn it on. To the right of that is the menu where you can choose which wave you want the oscillator to play. You can also use the arrows on the right to choose different modes of the waveform. I'm going to choose square saw 1. Next is the pitch box here, where you can tune the oscillator. And you can either do this manually or you type in the value that you want. To the right of that is the wavetable position, which is the most important part of this type of oscillator, I think, which is signified by WT position knob, because this knob controls the position between the two waves. So for instance, I chose the square and saw wave, right? So if I turn the knob hard left, it's going to be just the square wave. If I turn the hard right, it's going to be a saw wave. And center or anything in between is going to be a mix between the two. Next to it, you will see the intensity knob. And all the way to the right will be the amp knob, which controls the volume. So the next one is our modulation oscillator. This oscillator allows us to modulate by using four different kinds of modulation. We have classic ring mod, phase, position, and filter FM. And as you can see here, you can assign different modulators for different oscillators here. Our last oscillator is going to be the noise oscillator. And this is used if you want to add a certain kind of noise in your patch. And the choices include my personal favorite, the white noise, but you have choices such as bright noise, tape hiss, and many more. The color knob allows you to shift the overall frequency spectrum, and next to it is the amp knob, which also adjusts the volume. And our last part is the feedback section. This basically routes the signal from the output back into the input, which makes everything sound a little bit bigger. So our next section is the filter. Massive's filter can work in two ways. These are serial or parallel. You can adjust that with the slider here. If it's serial, which means it's all the way up, the filters work one after another, meaning that filters 1 outputs get routed into filter 2 and then onward. If the slider is all the way at parallel, which means all the way down, then both filters work separately. If it's in the middle, it's a mix of both. So now we'll move on the filter menu. This is where you can choose from the various filters, including low pass, high pass, and band pass. Below that are the controller knobs for each filter, and for most filters there will be a cutoff and resonance knob. Sometimes filters might have different controls though, so keep that in mind. So let's do an example. Let's use oscillator 1. Now, if I have the slider next to the oscillator all the way at the top, it only routes to filter 1. If I have it all the way at the bottom, it only routes to filter 2. Keep in mind though, that if you want this result, then you want your filter slider in parallel. The next thing I'm going to show you is the volume slider for each filter. This controls the overall level of each filter. The next one is the mix slider. This is how you adjust the balance of the two filters between each other after they've been summed together. Our next section is the insert effects. To the right of that, there are many options where you can choose which effect you want to use. Below that are going to be the two knobs that control the effect. Each effect has a different set of parameters. One of my favorite features of Massive is that it lets you modify the routing of the signal flow of the patch, which allows for so many new possibilities for getting new sounds. For instance, the routing page in this case is really handy when it comes to using insert effects. You'll notice that there are these little boxes for insert 1 and 2. When the box is activated, it turns white. So as you can see here, by activating insert 1 before filter 1 and insert 2 after 2, or vice versa, you can get completely different sounds. The next section is output. The output section is the last stage of the signal flow before it gets sent to the DAW. This part has a pen knob which controls pen left, pen right, or middle, etc. It's also possible to control amp using modulation in this section. And to the right of that is the bypass slider. The bypass section basically allows you to take direct output from one of the three oscillators. This might be important if you have a certain sound in one of your oscillators and you don't want to run it through the filters or any effects, but you want to run it directly to the output. So you can choose bypass for that oscillator and it will go directly to the output. And finally, the last part of the output section is the master volume knob. Our next section is FX. This part is comprised of two FX and an EQ who are wired serially. So the way it works is FX1 and FX2 are completely identical, and the signal flow runs from FX1 to FX2 to EQ. You can choose a variety of FX here. And the EQ tab works really simply. There are four knobs. We have low shelf, boost, frequency, and high shelf. Low shelf and high shelf cut or boost their respective low end and high end frequencies. Frequency and boost allows you to select the frequency level you like to engage, and you can either choose to cut it or boost it in that level. And finally, we get to our big section, envelopes and LFO. So first, envelopes. Basically, envelope, it's like a package that wraps around our sound, and it determines how the sound is going to develop over time. It has 4 parts. We have attack, decay, sustain, and release. Attack is basically how long does it get for the sound to get from nothing to full volume. So the decay controls how long it takes to get from the attack at full volume down to sustain. So if you'd like a more percussive effect, for instance, you can do really fast decay and then you can keep sustain really low. And here in the output section, you'll notice the number 4, which means that the amp controller is assigned to envelope 4, which is a default setting for massive. And you can either choose one of the presets on the envelope menu, or you can work with it manually using morph or features like those. So the next section is LFO, and LFO is a low filter oscillator, so it's mainly used for bass kind of sounds. And we can make a new sound here and assign LFO 5, and you can choose the curve on the right, and on the left is a knob that controls the rate of the speed at which the LFO operates. Most likely you will want to sync your LFO to the tempo of your DAW, so make sure that sync is selected here. And below that is the amp knob, which controls the intensity of the LFO. So after those, we have our performer and the stepper. A performer is, the way I like to think of it is like a group of mini envelopes stacked together, and this is sort of like a simple envelope sequencer. So if you click on the green LFO button and select performer on it, you will see that it's broken into 16 divisions, and each division can have its own separate envelope curve. You can have 2 separate envelope sequences going at once as well, and you can see those displayed on the top and the bottom. And then the stepper. Let's drag number 8 into our pitch control here. So now the stepper works similarly to the performer tool, but instead of the curves, it sends absolute values. There are many presets available you can choose from here that you can use. So up next are the macro knobs. Macro knobs are especially useful when you're performing using a controller because it lets you control more than one parameter with a single knob. So just like how we did with performer and stepper, you can drag the number under the box below the parameter to control it, and that will assign it to the macro. You can determine the range that you want. And like I said earlier, you can use the same macro to control more than one parameter. Say, for instance, we want to control the cutoff, but we also want to control the amp knob at the same time. That's totally possible. So those are the macro knobs. And at last, we have the additional features. The 2 that I want to really point out are OSC and the voicings in the menu over here. So if you go to OSC, we will find that on the left we have the glide box where you get to control glide, and this is basically portamento. And but keep in mind that if you want to have portamento, then you have to go to voicing and click on monophonic, because if it's polyphonic then it will not play. So glide has 2 boxes in the top. We have equal and rate. Equal transitions from one note to another more gradual, while rate does it instantly. And this can also be done with playing by the time knob. And then next to it we have the pitch band, which can determine the minimum and maximum value when you use your pitch band wheel on the keyboard if you want to assign it there. And next to it is we have the vibrato, which has 2 wheels. We have rate, which determines the rate of the vibrato, and depth, which is the kind of the intensity the vibrato. And the next section is voicings. So here you can choose the voicing that you want. You can choose polyphonic, monophonic, or monoretate. And here you're also allowed to choose the trigger that you want, choosing between always, legato, or legato triller based on the articulation that you want for your notes. So these are the essentials of Massive, and I hope you got a good first impression of this great synth, and if you have any questions, please feel free to send them my way.